Hello everyone, today we're looking at a video from the most annoying editor in YouTube history. So if it's so annoying, why would I once again inflict this upon myself and upon you? Well, because as atrocious as the editing is, the arguments are worse, and that's something I just can't resist. Today it's about scientific and other miracles in the Quran.
You probably already know the fact that the universe keeps growing and getting bigger and bigger.
Oh man, already we have the noise in the background. Bum, 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 bum. This is gonna be a rough ride. To be honest, I didn't even hear what you said over that noise, so can you repeat that?
You probably already know the fact that the universe keeps growing and getting bigger and bigger.
Oh. No, I don't know that. Nobody knows that. Do you know that? We can't see outside the observable universe, so how would we know about the diameter of the universe? It could have a limited extent, if that even makes sense to say. It could have an infinite extent. If you're talking about expansion, that's about space-time expanding in the sense of points within space-time moving apart relative to each other. That doesn't exactly mean that the universe is getting bigger as such. It could be, but it doesn't have to be. It's not some established fact.
This is discovered by a guy around 100 years ago, which I mentioned in my video before.
What? You gotta speak up, I can't hear you.
What he has done is he watched the lights within the universe on his telescope and discovered that they were expanding outwards and were moving away from each other.
What were expanding outwards and moving away from each other? The a lot that he looked at with his telescope? It's like you forgot to put in the line where you mentioned what he was looking at.
This was discovered in 1929, and 300 years before, the first telescope was invented. But this is where it gets interesting.
Cool. I bet it doesn't, though.
1,000 years from that, a book has revealed from Allah, the God, to a man named Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Muhammad, peace be upon him. That's an interesting surname.
He's called the last prophet of mankind, the messenger, the warner.
Warner, W-O-R-N-E-R. Another interesting name. Must be German or something.
The book that was revealed to him called Quran, and this is what the Quran says about the universe from 1400 years ago. We built this universe with great might, and we are certainly expanding it.
I can tell somebody's been listening to Zakir Naik. Unfortunately, he has a tendency to just lie about what things say and what they mean. And what this verse seems to refer to, and what it's historically always been thought to refer to by Muslims, is just the expansiveness or the vastness of space. Now, you're a Sunni guy, I'm pretty sure. You have Sunnis posted all over your TikTok. Mufti Menk, Asim al-Hakim, Shabir Ali, Ismail Tajanna. So here's what some Sunni scholars have to say about what this verse means. Ibn Kathir, we have made expansive its space, raising it without any pillars until it stands alone as it is. Al-Tabari, we are possessors of great vastness and ability in creating it, the heaven. He made it expansive. So in other words, Allah made the heaven, or the sky, real big-like. Whoa, the sky goes from all the way over there to all the way over there. I won't read all of these, I'll just scroll through it. This is a list compiled by Akida.com. But you get the point. This idea that the Quran talks about Hubble's idea of universal expansion is a modern reinterpretation coming from people like Zakir Naik. If the Quran really clearly said, hey, the universe is continually expanding, guys, then you would think the Muslim scholars from before the 20th century would have read it that way. But they didn't. So either the Quran is terribly unclearly written, to the point that its verses can mean a whole bunch of radically different things and nobody can agree on what it even says, which would be a remarkable failing for a book written by a god, or it doesn't say or mean what Nike says it means. Now, the verse following this one should start to make it a little more clear what's actually being talked about, because it talks about Allah spreading out the earth, which sounds quite a bit like spreading out the earth like pizza dough, and this is further clarified if we look at other verses specifically about the firmament or the sky, such as 55:7 about how Allah lifted the sky up high above the earth, a sky that according to 69:16 is capable of being torn up and split and frail and flimsy, 91:5 where it talks about him building it, 21:32 about it being a roof, 22:65 about it falling down upon the earth unless Allah keeps it from doing it, 78:12 about him building 7 strong firmaments, or heavens or skies, basically domes over the earth, and as 71:15 says, one above the other, and this seems influenced by the very common 7 heavens idea of Mesopotamian religions and Judaism, and probably the celestial spheres of Ptolemy as well. All these ideas easily could have influenced Muhammad. By then they'd been around for centuries, if not longer. Just basic word of mouth and cultural diffusion would have made this something that the Arabs heard about, in just the same way as all the biblical stories reached Arabia. So the point is, this attempt to reinterpret and essentially rewrite the Quran to talk about modern science is just a massive retcon to try to make it line up a little bit better to the ideas of the modern world, which is a little bit pathetic. If you're going to be religious, just do that. You don't have to rewrite your book to ride science's coattails. But of course you're going to keep doing it because this is a scientific miracles in the Quran video, and that's what that stuff is all about.
Now let me ask you this. Do you know how heavy the clouds are?
Depends on the cloud, I guess. I've only weighed like 200 or 300 clouds. I meant to do more, but it's so hard to get them on the scale.
If you know, good for you.
Oh cool, thanks buddy.
But if you don't, it will definitely surprise you like it did to me.
Why was that clip of an apple falling on your head like that story about Isaac Newton? The imagery in your videos is so random.
Because an average cloud like this one right here is around 500,000 kilos, which is like having 100 elephants on your head.
Cool. Yeah, clouds are made of water, and they're pretty big, and when they rain, an awful lot of water comes out of them, so it's not really that surprising. It's not like a big rainfall with hundreds of thousands of liters of water is coming out of a cloud that weighs nothing. It weighed the same before it fell.
We've discovered this after 1803.
Oh my god, what's that in the sky behind that guy? I think it's a plasma beam. Is that what's making his hands melt together? Get out of there, fella, you're in danger.
And this is what the Quran says from way back. He's the one who makes you see the lightning in fear and hope, and who forms the heavy clouds.
That's it? Seriously? Just, the clouds look heavy. Well, yeah, of course they do. Thunderclouds are big and thick and black, and then they pour out assloads of water on your head. That doesn't imply some detailed understanding of the weight of the clouds. There's not even a number there. At least Aristotle, like 900 years earlier, talked about what clouds are. The exhalation of water is vapor. Air condensing into water is cloud. This is from his meteorology. This implies that clouds are made of water and therefore weigh the same as water. He also says that when cloud freezes, there is snow. So frozen clouds weigh the same as snow. There's no detail here, no sign at all that Muhammad understood anything out of the ordinary about clouds. If Muhammad really was trying to be a little natural philosopher with this, which of course he wasn't, then Aristotle, basically 1,000 years earlier, without being a prophet of God, absolutely blows Muhammad the fuck out.
If I ask you where does irons come from and you tell me from the ground, then you would be wrong.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, irons are made by people. Irons as in shackles, clap-em-in irons, or golf irons, or clothing irons. Yeah, those are from people.
Because the temperature of the earth isn't hot enough to make iron.
Oh, iron! The element. Right, the iron element is from stellar nucleosynthesis.
It wasn't until the mid-20th century, with the development of modern astronomical observation techniques and the study of meteorites, that scientists began to confirm that iron came from the space millions of years ago in the form of meteorites after a large stellar explosion.
Well, I guess billions of years ago is also millions of years ago. It's not so much just meteorites as it is the accretion of the Earth. But I guess at a certain point, once you have something that could be considered like a proto-Earth, then whatever else accretes onto it would fall towards it and be considered a meteorite, I guess. I am a bit confused, though, why you show an essentially modern Earth, even with stone buildings on it, and a bunch of cavemen, and the meteorites falling around them. That's incredibly anachronistic. I don't think you've understood the idea that well.
And this is what the Quran says about irons. We sent down iron with its great might, benefits for humanity, and a means for Allah to prove who is willing to stand up for him and his messenger without seeing him. Surely Allah is all-powerful, almighty.
Yeah, Allah lives in heaven. He lives in the sky. You know, the 7 heavens we were just talking about? And so whatever shows up on earth, he sent down from heaven. That's why in that same verse it says, we sent down the scripture. What, does science say the scripture fell to earth on a meteorite? And yes, that is the exact same Arabic word being used, by the way.
وَأَنزَلْنَا.
And not only that, it says that the scriptures were sent down with the messengers. So I guess the messengers fell from space too, along with the iron on top of the heads of the cavemen. It should be fairly obvious that this is not intended to mean what you're saying it means. You're just putting words in Allah's mouth.
Notice the word sent down?
Yes, I noticed. Did you not notice the first instance of it in that verse? Did you read this verse first? Ah, this video also has one single moment of silence. Lucky me, I feel much better having experienced that. Alright, turn the noise back on.
Let's continue. Stages of embryo. We all go through 3 stages of process before we come to this world. Germinal stage, embryonic stage, fetal stage, and then we pop out.
Alright, just so we're clear on this, those stages are arbitrary divisions by modern humans for the purpose of convenient discussion. It's like talking about children, adolescents, and adults. You could put more categories in there, or less. You could separate the adolescent group, for example, into tweens, and early teens, and late teens, or you could get rid of that category altogether and just talk about children and adults. These things are just generalizations that we happen to find useful at the moment. So you could, for example, take the germinal stage and the start of the embryonic stage, and divide it up into all these different stages, all of which, together, Muhammad would simply describe inaccurately as, it's a clot of blood.
To discover something like this, it takes time, data, and technology to prove it, which Prophet had neither of them from 1400 years ago.
Now, Aristotle was studying this stuff again like 900 years previously, and Galen about 400 years before. And the Quran's stages of semen, and then a clinging clot, and then a flesh lump, and then a fleshy, bony lump, and then the final baby that we see in Surah 23, 13, and 14 have a fair similarity to Galen's ideas about the development, which makes sense because those kind of ideas would have been what were floating around at the time. As you point out, it really helps to have some technology for this kind of research, microscopes especially, but you can do some of it without that. You're just not going to be as accurate, and that's what we see in the Quran and in Galen and in Aristotle and everyone else from way back who talked about or studied embryology.
This is what Quran says about embryos in the womb. He creates you in the wombs of your mothers in stages, one development after another, in 3 layers of darkness.
Okay, why would 3 layers of darkness refer to developmental stages? It doesn't even sound like it's talking about the thing you're saying it's talking about.
That is Allah, your Lord. All authority belongs to Him. There is no God worthy of worship except Him. How can you then be turned away?
You could have just read the relevant part. The religious babble at the end doesn't contribute anything. I'm already aware that the Quran endlessly talks about how great Allah is. That's one of the 2 major things it does. It talks about how great Allah is, and it talks about how the unbelievers should burn in hell. What does that have to do with the embryology stuff?
After Keith L. Moore, a professor of anatomy, meaning someone who studies the body structure and how its parts work together, have seen this verse from the Quran. This is what he said.
Yeah, I don't care what Keith Moore had to say about it. He doesn't say anything beyond what you've just said. Muhammad couldn't have possibly known this common idea from hundreds of years previous. This goes on for almost a full minute. Why does this comprise like 10% of your video? Am I supposed to be wowed by the authority of Keith?
This is what the Quran states about 2 seas. He merges the 2 bodies of fresh and salt water, yet between them is a barrier they never cross.
Okay, well, if you take that as a literal statement, that's not true about any place on Earth.
Referring to this place where the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean don't mix, like they have a wall between them.
The Atlantic and the Pacific. I'm sorry, but can you show me that again? Do you not know the difference between the Pacific Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea? Is there even a possible way for you to screw that up worse? Well, I guess if you labeled the European landmass as the Pacific Ocean, that'd be worse. Not by much. And this clip you showed before is not the Atlantic Ocean meeting the Pacific Ocean. This isn't a phenomenon that occurs at the meeting of oceans, whatever that's supposed to mean. This is where the dirty, muddy, silt-riddled Amazon River flows into the Atlantic Ocean. A similar-looking thing occurs elsewhere on the Amazon as well, between 2 freshwater rivers, where the fairly blue and clean Rio Negro meets the much more sediment-rich and dirty-looking Amazon River. Anyway, no, the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans are not separated by some impenetrable wall. They're essentially one large body of water. Same goes for the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. The Mediterranean is saltier than the Atlantic beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, which would lead to the saltier water sinking below the less salty water, but the water mixes. Furthermore, you already showed the verse from the Quran that you're talking about, which you really shouldn't have done. You should have saved it for later, because now people will notice that if you're talking about the Atlantic and the Pacific, or the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, those are all salty bodies of water. But the verse says that one's fresh and one's salty. So if Muhammad was talking about what you say he was talking about, he was completely, laughably wrong.
But what makes this more interesting is that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, couldn't even have known this considering he lived his whole life in the Arabian region, far away from the oceans.
Yeah, real far away if you actually figure out where the Pacific Ocean is. You know, a person who cared about figuring out what this actually means might think, maybe he wasn't talking about where the Atlantic meets the Pacific. Maybe he meant something different. But that's not an option when what you care about is not the truth, it's just desperately manufacturing miracles.
In addition to that, this is what Quran adds to 2 seas. And He is the one who merges the 2 bodies of water, one fresh and one palatable, and the other salty and bitter, placing between them a barrier they cannot cross.
Right, so you think the Atlantic Ocean is fresh and palatable, or the Pacific Ocean is, or something? Alright, so if I deliver you a fresh jug of Atlantic Ocean water daily, you'll be happy just drinking that for the rest of your life?
Yes.
Fair enough, but I don't think the rest of your life would be all that long if you did that.
The fact that these seas don't mix shows the power of Allah and how well He designed this world. Because if the fresh and salty water were to be mixed, then that would cause animals on the ground and air to lose their lives one by one because of thirst.
Look at the state of those cows. Oh my god, that is a horror show. I don't think those cows were dying just from not drinking water. I think they were dying from their horrible mutations. Anyway, so you do understand that drinking salt water will kill you. That's good that that's among the few things that you seem to know. That's pretty useful information. But then how did you not clue in that you can't be talking about two saltwater seas? So now, as you said, the phrasing of this, that he merges the fresh water with the salt water but places a barrier between them that they can't cross, does seem to imply something either as a metaphor or as a literal claim about reality, about the importance of fresh water remaining fresh and separate for animals to drink. I don't know why you decided to jump to the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, and the Pacific for this. That seems to run completely against the point. If anything, what it sounds like is a river flowing into a sea. The freshwater river flows into the saltwater sea, and although they're merged, there's something keeping the saltwater from flowing back into the river and making it salty, and therefore unhealthy to drink. That'd probably be the most literal interpretation, but there are others. This could be intended as some sort of spiritual metaphor trying to communicate a message to the Muslims. But maybe it is really just an observation of some simple, mundane phenomenon that happens to be tossed in for some reason. Oftentimes Muslims online post these images of what seem like very clear lines between water flowing out of rivers into salty bodies of water, where because the salt water is heavier, it flows under the sediment-rich water from the rivers. Now, of course, in these places, the water is mixing. The water from the rivers is flowing into the ocean and mixing with the ocean water, and therefore the freshwater area doesn't just keep constantly increasing in size as the river keeps feeding it. Now, I strongly doubt that this is really the kind of thing Muhammad was referring to, but it is possible. He may have been referring, with a little bit of intentional or ignorant absolutist exaggeration, to an effect like this that either he'd seen or that he'd heard about. You have to remember, Muhammad was living in the 6th and 7th centuries. This is a late time period. This is 100 years after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. This isn't some primitive age where people hadn't explored. It was a time of enormous empires, long-distance travel, sailing, and trade. So if some sailor had seen something like this, or even if someone on land had seen something like this and found it impressive, word of it could and would easily get around. Just like Greek ideas about embryology and all these other things that show up in the Quran. The Quran was not composed in a vacuum by some people completely isolated from the rest of the world. That's why it talks directly about stories and ideas from other parts of the world. Or why, as we'll see in your next miracle, it talks about the news of the Roman-Persian War. These people were not so backwards that they had no outside information. Of course, you don't know if that's what this is meant to refer to, but if it is, the fact that a guy in Arabia could hear about something like this isn't a miracle. It's barely even interesting. But there are other options as well for what this might refer to. For example, since Islam is basically Judaism with an expansion pack, it's very possible that this is referring to the idea from Genesis of the firmament, the dome of the sky, which Allah built, which then has a sea above it. Something like Surah 54:11, where to initiate Noah's flood, he opens the gates of the sky and the water pours out. So either that or just that the clouds are the sea of the sky. And if we take that idea, we get a link to the non-mixing of the fresh with the salt water in 56:68 through 70, where he asks if you've considered that he's the one who brings down water from the clouds, and if he wanted to, he could make it salty. But he doesn't, so be thankful. The water from the Earth's sea doesn't mix with the water from the sky sea and make it salty. Regardless if it's the firmament or if it's the cloud sea, obviously the water from that sea merges with the water from the Earth sea when it rains, and also the sky itself meets with the ocean at the horizon. So there's a lot of different ways to interpret that makes sense. One interesting thing is that in Surah 55, after the verse that you brought up, it says that from both of the bodies of water come pearls and coral, which is interesting because I'm not sure you find those things in fresh water, especially not coral. But several verses when describing heaven and the companions that you'll receive in heaven describe the companions as being as lovely as pearls or coral, and also of there being divisions in heaven, 2 separate gardens, and a nicer place for the foremost in faith and a less nice place for the not quite as good in faith. Or the salty one could just be hell, but he says there's pearls and coral in both places, so I'm not sure how that would play in. So it's possible there's a metaphorical element there as well, which may have made more sense at the time, and by this point might just be lost to time. So, there's lots of pretty simple explanations here. I don't know which one's actually the intended one, if any, but the point is, once again, there's no reason to assume supernatural intervention. The idea with these miracles in the Quran is that they're supposed to be impossible without God telling them to Muhammad, but that's just simply not the case.
As this shows the power of Allah,
how does it do that exactly?
it also tells us that a man from centuries back in the desert, without any source of science or explanations, nor knowledge,
Zero. Take that, Muhammad.
Hasn't encountered an ocean during his lifetime.
Wait, why wouldn't he have encountered an ocean during his lifetime? The guy lived right next to the Red Sea, which is part of the Indian Ocean. Whether he ever went far enough to see the open ocean, who knows? The Red Sea is like 65 kilometers away from Mecca. That's not all that far, and you must know he went to Medina and back, which is well over 300 kilometers one way, and plus he fought all over the region. What is it with these attempts by Muslims to make Muhammad seem like some complete ignorant hick? He was a prominent warlord. He interacted with people from all over the place. He went all over the place. This pretense that he wouldn't know anything about anything is so absurd.
Can't have known about these 2 seas.
Not 2 seas. This is not a seas thing, which is why before you had to use a video from the Amazon River, and now you have to use a video from some other river, which some people say is the Fraser River meeting the Strait of Georgia, which I doubt a little bit considering the original version clearly shows a Chinese flag flying on the boat. Yes, there are lots of Chinese people in Vancouver, but still. In any case, regardless of which river this is, despite all the Muslim disinformation on this that claims that it really is the barrier between the Atlantic and the Pacific, which is overwhelmingly stupid, this is footage of a pretty large river meeting the ocean. So, alright, Muhammad couldn't have known this was 2 seas because it's not, but he could have known about a phenomenon like this. This happens in many different places. And the verses you showed contain no indication that he did. I don't know what you think you're accomplishing, but you're not.
But wait, we're not done yet.
That's a shame.
What I've mentioned so far is only a few scientific miracles of Quran, but did you know there are also historical prophecies?
Yes, I know that Muslims say that, yes.
For example, in the 7th century, a war broke out between the Romans and Persians. They were the 2 biggest empires in that time. Persians defeated Romans so badly that there was no more hope for the Romans to continue fighting, let alone standing as a nation.
So I think you're talking about the Byzantine-Sasanian War, where Heraclius got defeated at Antioch in 611, and then over the next few years the Persians took Damascus and Jerusalem and Egypt, which, you know, is definitely not a great situation, but the Byzantine Empire was still a formidable opponent. This wasn't some little backwater. You say there was no more hope for the Romans to continue fighting. Well, that's just not true. And you can see this by the fact that they did continue fighting and then also won.
Without going too deep into how the war started or why, what we need to know is that it was a war started with revenge and turned into a religious fight.
You say we need to know that, but we don't. That has nothing to do with the prophecy you're going to talk about. This prophecy is what it is, or isn't what it isn't, regardless of the cause of the war.
If you want to have the full context, I'll put the link in the description.
I really don't care about that. Can you get to the point?
Meanwhile, at that time in Mecca, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his followers faced persecution from the polytheists. When non-Muslims of Mecca heard about the war between Romans and Persians, they began to say,
"Look, the fire worshippers of Iran are winning victorious, and the Christians, the people of the book, are getting crushed by our pagan brothers. Likewise, we, the idol worshippers of Arabia, will exterminate you and your religion."
After that, some verses were revealed to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as follows. The Romans have been defeated in a nearby land. Yet following their defeat, they will be victorious. Within 3 to 9 years, the whole matter rests with Allah before and after victory, and on that day the believers will rejoice.
Within 3 to 9 years. Wow, very specific, omniscient God. In fact, it's even worse because the word used there actually just means a few. Anyway, so Muhammad had a take on the war. Nobody's ever had a take on a war before. I don't hear all the time about how Russia's gonna win and about how Ukraine's gonna win in the Ukraine war right now or anything. If somebody has a good take that turns out to be right, good for them. I'm sure somebody will. I'm sure plenty of people will. Especially if they're rooting for one side. If they're rooting for the Ukrainian side, they're gonna be saying, yeah, Ukraine's gonna win. And then if Ukraine wins, they'll say, see, I told you so. I'm the next prophet of God. From the story you just presented, it sounds like Muhammad was rooting for the Roman side for whatever reason. So it kind of makes sense he would be saying stuff like, yeah, don't worry guys. In a few years, our guys are going to win. But wait a second, how did he know about this war at all? And why was he surrounded by people talking about this and other world affairs, if he was a completely isolated, know-nothing idiot? Do you see the contradiction between this and your previous miracle? Could you make up your mind one way or the other about whether Muhammad knew anything at all about the outside world?
This verse is revealed to the Prophet in 617 AD.
Oddly specific. Where are you getting this date exactly?
Stating that the Romans will have their victory between 3 and 9 years. This seemed unlikely at the time due to ongoing Persian successes and Muslims' persecution.
And things that seem unlikely at the moment never happen. Nobody's ever rooted for a hockey team with slightly less good odds of winning and then that team won. You'd need to have a direct line to God for that to happen. Wait though, why would the persecution of the Muslims by the polytheists make it seem less likely that the Romans would have a victory, any victory, against the Persians? One doesn't hinge on the other. What a random thing to say.
After this verse, Romans will be failing every battle against the Persians for 5 more years.
Assuming he actually came up with this verse in 617, like you say, then yeah, it wasn't a great 5 years until 622. I don't know if they lost every battle. Maybe they did. I just know that that period didn't go well.
And then it happens. Despite all the odds, the Romans somehow stood up and defeated the Persian Empire in 622 AD.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what they did. They found ways to spend less money and get more money and therefore build their army up. And that's my point. Like, if you were talking about the Persian Empire attacking some random little country with no resources, you might at least have a more impressive story, but it's the Byzantine Empire. As you said, the other largest empire on the planet. The fact that they managed to pull their shit together and fight back isn't exactly the most surprising thing in the world. Now, when you say they defeated the Persian Empire in 622 AD, you don't mean they completely defeated them. That was just the year that the counteroffensive started, and it would go on from then until about 628, which, assuming your dating of Muhammad's guess is correct, is about 11 years later.
At the same time, the Muslims achieved a significant victory against their opponents in Mecca.
Okay, what does that have to do with anything? That wasn't referred to in the verse, so why bring it up?
When the verse came true in front of everyone's eyes, many declared that this prophecy couldn't be from a man unless it wasn't revealed to him, and became Muslims.
What a terrible reason to make a decision like that. Did these people have heat stroke or something? Why were their brains working so bad?
There are 2 miracles in these verses.
No.
One is that the Quran used the Arabic word bid'i, meaning a few, referring to 3 to 9 something.
Referring to a few. It's just a vague hand-wavy number. Don't worry, the Persians will be beaten at some point. You seriously expect me to believe that that's miraculous foreknowledge from God?
Giving Romans will be victorious in this time frame.
Sweet Christ, what happened to that kid's face? You gotta cool it with the AI art. It's freaking me out.
And so they did.
Right, well, they didn't finally defeat the Persians within that time frame. That was about 11 years later. So clearly all you think this means is that the Romans will have a victory of some sort somewhere, which is a much less ambitious claim. Whether you're on the losing side or the winning side, you'll tend to have victories at some point. So the miracle is that Muhammad said, at some point, the Romans will have some kind of a victory somewhere. Wow, how could that not be straight out of God's mouth?
Second, the verse before, Quran said the Romans have been defeated in a nearby land. Nearby in Arabic is Etna. But this word has one more meaning, which means lowest. So the verse also states that the Romans have been defeated at the lowest land. The land the Romans were defeated was the region around the city of Jerusalem, now called the Dead Sea, below 420 meters of the sea level. It is the lowest land, as we confirmed this fact with our modern scientific measurements and surveys.
Wow, so where do I even start with this? Well, the Romans, of course, were defeated in many different places. There wasn't just one defeat. They kept losing territory to the Persians. That's the point. And not just the Persians, but the Avars and the Slavs, too. This was a widespread problem. Now, you're picking out one specific defeat, the taking of Jerusalem by the Persians several years into this trouble. But why would Muhammad be referring specifically and only to that? But if he was, Jerusalem is not in the Dead Sea. Here's an elevation map of the region, and you can see that the area around the Dead Sea is very narrowly confined to basically the width of the Dead Sea, and everything around it is at a much higher elevation. Jerusalem is not in that valley. Jerusalem is way up here on the hill, in this little indent in the West Bank area. It's like 750 meters above sea level. So if Muhammad actually meant that, he was badly wrong. Now you're just putting wrong words in Allah's mouth. But please, innovate some more interesting things for your religion. I enjoy it.
But that's not all, folks.
Okay, let's have it.
Quran has many more miracles that are scientific, linguistic, prophecies, and moral guidance.
Moral guidance miracles, okay.
Even if you say one of them was by chance, there are second, third, and so on.
I don't think I've ever seen one of these miracles in the Quran claims that was specific and unknowable enough for me to have to say it was by chance. Most of the time I'm just like, yeah, why wouldn't it say that? That's not surprising. But, you know, just keep tossing shit at the wall, see what sticks, I guess. Eventually, somebody you're talking to won't instantly know exactly how to address one of your claims, and then you can go, aha! Therefore God! It's just such desperate got-nothing behavior.
And if you claim that Muhammad, peace be upon him, was just a smart guy,
Don't worry, I would never claim that.
It is still not possible for someone to make prophecies that are correct every single time from past and future.
Like what? Do you have any even remotely interesting examples? Like, surely the stuff in this video wasn't your best, right? Surely.
No matter how smart they can be. Because if there's even one mistake in a book that claims to be from God, then that book can't be accepted as the words of God anymore. Because if God is all-knowing, all-seeing, then this book also needs to be such as that.
Great. Well, you've interpreted several errors into it, like the Jerusalem thing, the defeat of Persia within 9 years, there being an impenetrable wall between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, and also the Pacific Ocean is really the Mediterranean, and also one of them is freshwater. The scriptures flew down to Earth on a meteorite. Like, I could come up with a list on my own of mistakes in the Quran. I mean, start with all the creationist stuff, right? Noah's flood, creation of the earth and the heavens in 6 days, Adam and Eve. You know, that's just the real easy Abrahamic pickings. But I don't even have to start into that. Your interpretations introduce multiple errors into the Quran that aren't there unless you interpret it that way. But you do interpret it that way, and therefore by your interpretation, the Quran has multiple errors, and therefore is not from God. Why did you do that to yourself? Did you even realize you were?
So if a man from a desert can't read or write, and in a time far away from technology, brings a book to you characterized by its unique style, rhythm, eloquence, and prophecies that come true one by one each time, would you think that man could write such a book like that?
Okay, well, you're clearly not talking about the Quran, so let's stick to the point.
Or is there someone else behind it? Nor does he speak on his own whims. It is only a revelation sent down to him. Surely there has to be someone else who knows the past, present, and future, and this creation all around us better than anyone else.
Or the guy who wrote that book is just clairvoyant or something. I don't know why we're jumping to these weird conclusions. I feel like you're not being very parsimonious. But again, there's no need to talk about this hypothetical book. We're here to talk about the Quran, not this other book, so again, let's stick to the point.
And who has the power to do so? This is what Allah says after the war between Romans and Persians in the next verse. The victory willed by Allah. He gives victory to whoever He wills. For He is the Almighty, most merciful. This is the promise of Allah, and Allah never fails in His promise, but most people do not know.
Yes, again, I'm aware that the Quran endlessly talks about how great Allah is. I don't need more examples of that. I've read the book. I pretty much get the point.
They only know the worldly affairs of this life, but are totally oblivious to the hereafter. Have they not reflected upon their own being? Allah only created the heavens and the earth, and everything in between for a purpose and an appointed term. Yet most people are truly in denial of the meeting with their Lord.
Empty, time-wasting babble. I'd almost think you were trying to stretch the video to 10 minutes, but you didn't succeed, so I guess not.
Do you know which one of the miracles of the Quran is most impressive? That the book itself is preserved from the time of the last prophet named Muhammad, peace be upon him, till our time, word by word, letter by letter.
Do we have to get into that right at the end?
Now, I'm not going to go too much in detail to make this video longer, so let's save this for another video.
Ah, very good, thank you. Well, in that case, I guess we're done. So thank you everyone for watching. If you would be so kind before you go, please do give the video a like and click subscribe if you haven't. And if you like the channel, maybe consider supporting. A couple of bucks per video or per month is enormously helpful, and huge thanks to all of my supporters who've already made that choice. Early access, email list, list.logicked.com, and I'll see you next time.